Hey guys, today I am kicking off my book to movie analysis series and we are starting with World War Z. Now this is a movie that I saw when it first came out a few years ago, but I hadn't read the book until recently, and so I wanted to talk about the differences with you guys. As a warning, this video will be filled with spoilers both for the book and the movie, so if you haven't seen or read either of these stories, then I would not recommend watching this. However, if you are familiar with either one of the two and you want to know what the differences are, you're in the right place. So let's start off with what the book is actually about. So the book is following this journalist who is going around to different areas of the world after the apocalypse, zombie apocalypse, has ended. And so it's a really interesting perspective. It's not something I've ever seen done in a zombie story before, whether it's on screen or in a book. You don't actually get to see the zombie apocalypse unfold in real time. You're reading people's stories, recounting it from different areas of the world and from different perspectives. So you have people who are, high up in the military, recounting their experiences. You have people who are just normal everyday people who go to a job, come home, whatever. You just have a lot of different perspectives, which I think is just extremely intriguing, and I absolutely loved this book because of it. And one of the great parts about this book is the fact that the explanations and the stories in this talk about how they got rid of the zombies or how they overcame them, but also why it was a problem, like what fail-safes failed because of this zombie apocalypse and why did they fail. And I thought that was a really interesting look at it. It had a lot of political ramifications and engineering ramifications, and it was just really fascinating to get the perspectives of why did it happen, how did everything we tried to do to prevent it from happening or to keep it from spreading, why did those fail? And it was just a really interesting look at them. So now that I've given you a very brief synopsis of the book, let's talk about the movie. So the movie is very, very different, which I knew that going into this book, but I didn't quite understand the extent of it. So people who read the book before seeing the movie were very angry at the movie, or at least from what I had seen. Most people were upset because the movie didn't portray the book at all, and I didn't understand that. When I first saw the movie, and that was way before I read the book, I loved this movie. I thought it was a really good zombie apocalypse movie. A lot of people hated on it for being generic, but I thought it was really interesting. And so I honestly thought that after reading this book and rewatching the movie after that, I was going to absolutely hate the movie. And that's not necessarily the case. But what the movie does very different from the book is it is following this one family, and actually this one guy played by Brad Pitt, and his experience watching the zombie apocalypse happen and start, and his journey through figuring out how to cure it, essentially, or overcome it. And the biggest difference is the fact that the book was focused on so many individual stories. I mean, some stories were only a couple pages long or a couple paragraphs long, whereas this was just following one person's story and him interacting with a few different other storylines throughout the movie, but it was mainly very focused on him. Another big difference is how the zombies actually act in the book versus the movie. For anyone who has watched a lot of zombie movies, you know that the zombies differentiate greatly between some stories depending on how they're portrayed. Some are slow, some are fast. How they turn is different, whether it's within seconds, whether it takes a few days. So in the book, it ends up taking time depending on how they're bit. So if someone's bitten a major artery or something, they turn really quickly. But if they're bit somewhere where it takes a while for it to get into their bloodstream, it takes longer for them to turn, which makes sense biologically, to me at least. And so the movie, they turn within 10 seconds. And that is something that they point out really dramatically in the movie. They pay attention to it. They focus in on, Brad Pitt's character watching this one zombie turn, and it's counting. There's a thing in the background counting, essentially. And so you know that it goes in 10 seconds, and that plays out several times throughout the movie where someone gets bit or they think they get infected and he's counting to 10 in his head to see if they're going to turn or not. Despite there being major differences between the book and the movie, I do think that the movie played homage to a few details from the book. It definitely is not enough for it to be a strict adaptation, but they do touch on a few things. So one of the things is in the book, they're called Zeeks, not necessarily zombies. And in the movie, they also reference that I think only once or twice. And I honestly never caught it the first time I watched it, but when I rewatched it after reading the book, I was like, I see what you're doing. Another thing is also towards the end of the movie when we're kind of getting this epilogue of them defeating the zombies and how they're going about eradicating them, you see these huge mounds of zombies that are just mountains, essentially, in this battlefield or whatever empty field they're in. And I thought that the first time I watched this that was kind of cheesy and corny, and I was like, why would they end up in piles like that unless people are like dragging them onto piles, and like why? Unless you're gonna like sit there and burn them, but that's not what they were showing in the epilogue. But in the book, one of my favorite stories, a couple of them actually, are the military responses to these zombies and how they're organizing to protect the people. And one of these huge battles that happens in the book is a situation where the army and the military are sitting there and they're just mowing down zombies as they come down this kind of smaller corridor that they've bottlenecked them into. And because of the way it's set up in this small little corridor, they are just creating a wall of zombies unintentionally by killing all of them, and they keep like climbing over the top of them to get there like the zombies do. And you know, every time they get to the top they get shot and they fall, and so therefore the mountain just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And that was just a really interesting visual from the book, and I thought it was cool that they added it to the movie, even though it was like kind of just a little throwaway reference towards the end. Another smaller reference to the book in the movie is when they mention the Russian troops, or the Russian kind of military response to these zombies. And that was a really interesting part of the book as well, where you get to see how the Russians are dealing with this zombie attack. And essentially they're very, very strict with it. And so at one point their team fails at a mission and this, you know, agenda that they had, and what they do is they separate all of the Russian troops into groups of 10 people, and they tell these people that they have to pick one person out of their 10, and they all have to kill that person as punishment. And one of my favorite things about like apocalypse stories, whether it's in books or movies, TV shows, etc., is how humans respond and how humans interact with each other when this apocalypse is happening, more so than defeating or trying to deal with this outside threat. I really enjoy how stories portray the human element of it and how human behavior changes in this really stressful environment. I do think that was something that was much greater touched upon in the book, and it played out in these little micro stories so much more than the movie did. And despite that, I do think that the movie was really good in the way they portrayed it. There's several instances where Brad Pitt's character and his family, or just he himself, encounters these different groups of people, whether they're families or individuals or military groups, and the individual stories within those little interactions was really interesting, and I think that they were fleshed out like just the right amount for this movie. Obviously you can't like super flesh out these characters in the middle of a chasing zombie kind of storyline, but I really liked that you got to know what was going on with these situations. And I also like that the movie didn't shove it down your throat either. They weren't like, oh, look at this, like you need to pay attention to this and we're gonna make this super obvious. I like that it was a little bit more subtle here and there. So like I mentioned earlier, I really thought that I was going to dislike the movie much more after reading the book, but that wasn't the case. I still think it's a great movie. Book to movie adaptation wise, it's awful. It's not a great adaptation. It does not even stick to the basis of the main story. I mean, just the way it's told is completely different. And the zombies are different. A lot of main points are different. However, I do think the movie in and of itself, as like just an encapsulated movie without a book reference or book tie-in, I think it's a really good movie personally. I don't think it's anything that's like should have won awards or anything like that, but I still think it's a really enjoyable zombie movie. And so if you like those kind of things, I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't yet. The absolute biggest change that was from the book to the movie for me personally was the fact that these zombies did not pay attention to sick people, which I thought was a really interesting concept in the movie. However, it's nothing that's in the book. Like, that's not a thing. But it was interesting to know that this disease and this plague that's going through these zombies is something that recognizes disease in other blood that it wants to get a hold of, and it was just really interesting concept to throw into the movie. So I still think it's good. I think it's a really interesting take on the zombie apocalypse. The movie and book has very different points and very different viewpoints, but they're still great stories both separately and together. So what are your thoughts on this book to movie adaptation? Have you read the book? Did you like it? Did you see the movie? Did you like it? Did you think both of them were terrible? Let me know. The point of this channel is to have conversations with you guys about things that we love, whether it is book or beauty related, because those are both things that I do on this channel. And I love having conversations with you guys, so let me know down below. If you like this book to movie analysis style video, please give me a thumbs up. That'll let me know to do more of them. And if you have any suggestions for ones you want to see, leave that in the comments below. And if you want to see more content from me, please subscribe. I would love to have you join my little bookish beauty family. And I will see you in my next video. Bye, guys.